She was 3 years old when the world went quiet. The hotel room in Lisbon, number 214 with a view of tiled rooftops and a sliver of the Tagus, smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and someone else's perfume. A housekeeper named Amalia found the girl sitting on the bed with her shoes off, clutching a little cotton bracelet threaded with 2 blue beads. She didn't cry. She just watched the door, as if waiting for it to open and fix everything. The manager, Senor Pereira, phoned the Policia de Segurança Pública. An officer named Inspector Duarte arrived with a notebook that snapped open like a question. "How long has she been alone?" he asked. No one knew. The register showed a woman had checked in under a Brazilian passport and a false surname. She paid cash. She walked out before dawn and didn't come back. The only trace, a receipt for a long-distance call and the smell of her perfume catching in the curtains. The newspapers in Lisbon were quick to write a paragraph, then a column. A menina de quarto 214, they called her. The girl from room 214, tiny letters above football scores and election polls. People stopped by the station with toys and cookies. Someone even offered a crib. But the days stretched. The girl said almost nothing, just a whisper of "mama" and "no va" that slipped out in sleep. When asked her name, she pressed the blue beads into her palm until the skin went white. Bureaucracy did what it does. A folder assembled itself around her life. The orphanage sat off a narrow street in Arroyos, where laundry flapped between buildings like small flags of surrender. There, a social worker chose a new name from a list, Clara, because the child's gaze was bright and unwavering, as if light kept finding her. They guessed her age by her height, by the baby teeth that were almost all in. 3, maybe a little more. No birth certificate, no known birthday, so the file assigned 1, October 10th, a day to pin a life to. Clara learned the rules of the orphanage: line up, hold hands, nap after lunch. At night she touched the bracelet to her cheek and watched the square of moonlight creep across the ceiling. Once a volunteer took the children to the Miraduro da Senhora de Monte, where Lisbon spread out like a quilt of red roofs. The city felt enormous to a girl with a paper name. A reporter returned one spring, this time with a photographer. "Smile," he coaxed in careful European Portuguese, and Clara, who understood more than she could say, lifted her chin obediently. The photo ran small, but it traveled farther than anyone expected. A British couple living in London saw the story while visiting friends in Cascais. They had been trying to adopt for years. "Look at her eyes," the woman whispered, tapping the picture as if that might bless it into permanence. The adoption board moved slowly, then all at once. Interviews, notarized statements, a parade of signatures. Inspector Duarte signed his own name with a flourish, as if to say, "Let there be justice, even if late." On a warm afternoon, the British couple arrived at the orphanage with a stuffed rabbit and a halting "Hola, Clara." The woman knelt. "We came to find you," she said, English softening each syllable. Clara studied their faces. Freckles, a hesitant smile, eyes that watered too quickly. They didn't smell like her mother's perfume. They smelled like laundry soap and airplane air. The man offered his hand. She placed the braceleted fist into his palm. It was not quite trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The flight to London felt like being lifted out of a story she hadn't finished reading. The plane pierced clouds that looked to Clara like mountains of milk. A flight attendant gave her a pair of plastic wings. She pinned them to her sweater as if they could hold her in the sky. When Heathrow's doors sighed open, cold air touched her cheeks, colder than any Lisbon winter, and English rose and fell around her like a fast, unfamiliar song. The city stretched. Gray stone, black cabs. A river that didn't sparkle like the Tagus but carried its own kind of gravity. In the flat in Hackney, a tiny room weighted with wallpaper dotted with stars. The woman tucked in the stuffed rabbit beside Clara's pillow, as if it too needed reassurance. That night, sleep came slowly. Clara lay awake and held the bracelet up to the window, catching city light in the beads. Somewhere, a mother might be counting the same seconds years away or not at all. She did not know. She only knew the bracelet was real, and the stars on her wall were not. And between those truths, she would have to grow. In the dark, her new father stood in the doorway, just a silhouette. "She's brave," he whispered. "She's home," the woman answered, almost believing it. But far away, on a different continent and a different clock, a woman who had once crossed an ocean with more hope than options was also awake, tracing a map with her finger, circling a city she could not forget. Clara's first morning in London would bring a new language, a new school, a new alphabet of small mercies and small losses. But right now the house was quiet, the radiator ticking like a patient metronome. The bracelet warmed in her hand, and in a file across the sea, under a paperclip and the word unresolved, the unanswered question waited, because sometimes the story starts where everyone thinks it ends. If this beginning gripped you, tell me, what detail struck you most, the bracelet, the newspaper headline, or the first cold breath in London? Drop your thoughts below, and if you want the next part, hit subscribe and like so you don't miss Clara's journey. London never stopped moving. For Clara, that meant the hum of buses beneath her window, the endless rhythm of footsteps on wet pavement, and the quiet sigh of her adoptive mother, Margaret, when the kettle clicked off. The city became her new language before English did, a place of constant motion, where silence was rare and belonging always seemed just around the corner. At first, Clara was shy at school. Her accent was soft and strange, the result of two languages colliding somewhere in her throat. The other children asked where she was from, and when she couldn't answer, they made up stories for her, that she was a princess from Spain, or a spy, or someone who'd forgotten her real name. Sometimes she laughed with them, pretending it was true. Other times she stared at the rain streaking the classroom windows, feeling the same blur inside her. Margaret and Peter, her new parents, were patient, gentle. They framed her first school drawing, a wobbly house under a sun too big for the paper. Every night they told her, "You're safe here, darling." And she believed them, or tried to. Still, some nights she woke from dreams she couldn't explain. Flashes of a woman's hands adjusting a dress, a voice singing softly in a language she didn't yet understand, and always that faint trace of perfume. When she turned 10, Margaret gave her a tiny wooden box to keep her treasures. Inside it went the bracelet, now faded and frayed, and a clipping of the newspaper article about the girl from room 214. Clara read it again and again, tracing the black and white photograph of a child she barely remembered being. "Do you think my real mother ever saw this?" she once asked. Margaret hesitated. "If she did," she said softly, "I hope she knew you were safe." Adolescence came like London fog, sudden, heavy, and everywhere at once. Clara became curious, restless. She found herself drawn to libraries, to the smell of paper and dust, where answers seemed possible. She'd sit for hours reading about international adoption laws, identity rights, missing persons. She told herself it was for school, but deep down she knew she was looking for herself. Margaret and Peter loved her deeply, but even love can't fill every silence. Once, after an argument about curfews and college choices, Clara shouted, "You don't understand what it's like not to know who you are," and immediately regretted it. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You're ours," she whispered, "but I know a part of you is somewhere else." That night Clara went for a long walk through the city, letting the wind untangle her thoughts. London, for all its noise, felt lonelier than ever. University gave her space and purpose. Clara studied journalism, drawn to the pursuit of truth, to the idea that somewhere, someone was always searching for an answer too. Her mentors called her relentless. Her friends called her brave. She just called it necessary. Every missing person she wrote about, every forgotten story she uncovered, was an echo of her own. Still, no official record existed of her before that hotel room. No birth certificate, no travel documents, nothing. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air, a girl without a past. But the bracelet, that was real. So one day, she brought it to a small Portuguese cafe in Notting Hill, where the owner, an elderly woman named Dona Rosa, noticed it immediately. "Isso é brasileiro," she said, eyes widening. "From the Northeast, I think. They make those for babies to protect them." Clara froze. "Brazilian?" Dona Rosa nodded. "Yes, dear. Maybe your mother wanted to keep you safe." It was the first clue that pointed somewhere solid. For the first time in years, Clara felt something stir. Not just curiosity, but a pull. Deep and undeniable. She began to write down everything she remembered. The hotel room, the perfume, the woman's hands. Then, with her journalist's determination, she booked a flight to Lisbon. It was time to start looking backward. When she landed, the air smelled of sea salt and old memories. The city hadn't changed much. The same cobblestone hills, the same yellow trams groaning up steep streets. But for Clara, every corner felt haunted. She visited the hotel, now renovated and renamed, and stood outside room 214, tracing the brass numbers with her fingertips. The staff had changed long ago. No records from the 1980s remained. But one older employee remembered hearing the story when she was young. The police tried everything, the woman said. They said the mother had vanished like smoke. Clara thanked her and left, her notebook heavier with questions than answers. That night, sitting at a small restaurant overlooking the river, she stared at the empty page before her. She wanted to write the story, her story, but didn't know where to begin. "Who are you?" she whispered to the reflection in the glass. "And who am I because of you?" Then her phone buzzed. A foreign number. Unknown. She hesitated, her heart thudding in her throat. She answered. A woman's voice, trembling but clear, spoke from the other side of the world. "Clara, is it you?" The restaurant's noise faded into silence. The river seemed to hold its breath. Clara gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. "Who is this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. A pause. Then, through a broken sob, "I've been looking for you. For 30 years. The connection crackled. The line went dead. For hours after the call, Clara just stared at her phone, the screen dark and still. Her pulse hadn't yet slowed. 30 years. The words echoed inside her chest like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She tried calling back, but the number appeared as private. Whoever had spoken, whoever had said her name, had vanished again, as if the universe had offered her a truth and then snatched it away. The next morning, Clara walked along the riverbank, her notebook clutched to her chest. The air was cool, the sky washed in silver. She kept replaying the voice in her mind, the slight tremor, the accent that was neither Portuguese nor quite English. There had been warmth in it, and something else. Regret. By midday, her instincts as a journalist began to override the shock. She called her friend and former university mentor, Daniel Price, now an editor at the London Chronicle. "You remember my story, the girl from the hotel?" she asked. He laughed softly. "I remember you swore you'd never write it." "Well," she said, "maybe I was waiting for the ending." Daniel arranged for a trace on the call. The results came back within hours. "Clara," he said on the line that evening. The call originated from São Paulo, Brazil. Brazil. The word hit her like a key sliding into a long locked door. Dona Rosa's voice echoed, "Isso é brasileiro." Her hands trembled. "Then that's where I have to go." Within a week, Clara was on another plane, this time heading toward the country that might finally explain her existence. She packed light, one suitcase, her notebook, and the bracelet, now tucked safely into her pocket. As the plane crossed the Atlantic, she thought of how her life had been a circle of departures, always leaving, never returning. But maybe this flight was different. Maybe this one was leading home. When she landed, São Paulo greeted her with humidity and chaos, taxis honking, street vendors calling out prices, Portuguese words rushing around her like a river she half understood. She felt dizzy, but alive. The journalist in her began to take over again, scanning faces, sounds, colors. Somewhere in this immense city, a woman might be waiting, watching the same skies. She checked into a modest guest house in Vila Mariana, her nerves twisting tighter by the hour. That night, as she reviewed her notes, the hotel phone rang. Her heart stuttered. Slowly she answered. "Clara?" It was the same voice, older, still trembling. "Who are you?" Clara whispered. "My name is Helena," the woman said. I think I'm your mother." The silence that followed was heavier than words. Clara pressed the phone against her ear, afraid to breathe. How do you know that? Because I never stopped looking for you, Helena said. And because of the bracelet, the one with 2 blue beads. I made it before you were born. Clara's throat closed. The air in the room thickened with disbelief and hope tangled together. Why did you leave me? She asked, her voice breaking like thin glass. Helena began to cry. It wasn't my choice. I was 20, alone in Lisbon. I came with a man who promised work, but he lied. He took my passport, my money. I had nothing. You were sick. I couldn't feed you. I begged for help, but when I went to find food one morning, they had locked me out. You were gone. I thought... She stopped, swallowing her sobs. I thought you were dead. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks before she realized they'd come. The story seemed impossible. Yet the voice, the emotion, it felt real in a way nothing else ever had. Where are you now? In Recife, Helena said softly. I saw an article about you 2 years ago. Someone shared it online. I tried to contact the authorities, but they said there was no record of you. I didn't know how to find you until now. How did you get my number? I found the journalist who wrote that story when you returned to Lisbon. He helped me. He said maybe you were ready to know. The 2 women stayed on the phone for hours, hesitant at first, then desperate, afraid to hang up, afraid to lose each other again. Helena told her about the years of searching, the letters sent to embassies, the photos she kept of a baby with dark curls. Clara shared fragments of her life. London, her adoptive parents, her work. It was strange how 2 decades could be compressed into a single fragile conversation. When the line finally went quiet, Helena whispered, Come home, Clara. Please. I want to see you before life steals another year from us. Clara sat motionless long after the call ended. Outside, the Brazilian night pulsed with distant music and warm air. She opened her palm, feeling the smoothness of the beads against her skin. That simple bracelet had crossed oceans, decades, and heartbreak, and somehow it had led her here. She booked a flight north for the next morning to Recife. But before turning off the light, Clara opened her notebook and wrote 1 line across the page. Sometimes the answers we search for are searching for us too. And as she closed it, for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what the truth might bring. The flight from São Paulo to Recife felt both endless and too short. Clara sat by the window, tracing circles on the glass, watching clouds drift like pages being turned. Somewhere beneath them was the city where her story had begun, or maybe where it had been broken. She kept imagining the moment she'd see Helena. Would she recognize her? Would she feel anything at all? Or just emptiness dressed as closure? When the plane landed, the heat hit her like a memory. Thick, heavy, familiar in a way her body understood before her mind did. Outside, Recife shimmered under the afternoon sun. Colorful houses, the smell of fried tapioca, music spilling from doorways. Clara's pulse quickened. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now, with her feet on the ground, she realized that nothing could prepare her for reality. Helena was waiting in the arrivals hall, standing beside a column with trembling hands. Time had softened her. Streaks of gray threaded through her dark hair. Fine lines traced years of longing across her face. But her eyes were the same deep brown that stared back from Clara's childhood photos. For a second, neither moved. Then, as if pulled by gravity itself, they walked toward each other. Clara, Helena whispered. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears at first, no words that could possibly match the decades lost. Just an embrace, cautious at first, then desperate, unbreakable. Helena pressed her face against Clara's shoulder, repeating, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Over and over, until the words dissolved into sobs. Clara didn't answer. She just held on, breathing in the scent of soap and salt air. Not perfume this time, but something real, alive. They spent hours talking in the small apartment Helena rented by the beach. Old photos covered one wall. People Clara didn't know. A grandmother, cousins, a younger Helena laughing with friends. On a shelf sat a single baby picture, faded, curled at the edges. You were 6 months old there, Helena said, handing it to her. I kept that photo everywhere I went. Clara traced the edges with her thumb. You never gave up. Helena smiled through tears. How could I? You were all I ever wanted. They sat side by side, the air thick with stories untold. Helena spoke of the man who brought her to Portugal, a recruiter who promised hotel work and then disappeared with her documents. How she'd wandered for days, hungry and terrified, trying to care for a baby in a foreign city. How after Clara was taken by the authorities, she was deported back to Brazil with nothing but a broken heart and a memory she refused to let die. I wrote to the embassy, to the police, to the newspapers. Helena said. No one answered. I prayed every night. I told myself you were alive even when everyone said to move on. Clara listened, silent tears running down her face. Every word was a piece of a puzzle she'd been trying to assemble since childhood. And yet part of her still struggled to believe that the woman sitting across from her was real, not a dream, not a ghost from a newspaper headline. Later they walked along Boa Viagem beach. The waves rolled in slow and steady, the way time does when it's done hurting you. Helena pointed to the horizon. When I couldn't find you, I used to come here, she said. I thought if I watched the ocean long enough, it might carry you back to me. Clara smiled faintly. Maybe it did. For the first time, laughter broke through. Small, nervous, healing. They talked about everything. London, Clara's childhood, the couple who had raised her with so much care. I want to meet them one day, Helena said softly. To thank them for loving you when I couldn't. That night Helena cooked moqueca, her mother's recipe. The scent filled the tiny kitchen, warm and comforting. As they ate, Clara looked around the table and realized she wasn't angry anymore. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape, from a wound to a scar that no longer defined her. After dinner, Helena brought out a small tin box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written to my daughter, wherever you are. The ink had faded, some pages smudged with tears, but the words were steady, full of hope. Clara read the first line aloud. If love can travel across oceans, then one day it will find you. Helena placed her hand over hers. And it did. Outside, the sea murmured against the shore, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt whole. Not because she'd found all the answers, but because she'd finally stopped running from the questions. Still, as she lay awake that night, she thought of Margaret and Peter, her adoptive parents, and the home waiting for her across the ocean. She knew she would have to tell them everything, that love wasn't about choosing one family over another, but finding space for both. But before that, she needed to understand something deeper, not just who her mother was, but who she herself had become. And then, as dawn painted the sky pink over Recife, Helena's phone rang. A man's voice spoke in Portuguese, urgent, low. Helena's face turned pale. It's him, she whispered. Who? Clara asked, alarmed. The man from Lisbon. He found out you're here. For a moment, the world tilted. The air in the tiny apartment thickened, as if the walls themselves were listening. Helena gripped the phone, her knuckles white. The man's name came through the static, Rogerio Almeida, the one who had taken her to Lisbon all those years ago. He called me, Helena said, voice trembling. He said he saw the news online that you came back to Brazil. He wants to meet. Clara's first instinct was anger. The thought of facing the man who had stolen her mother's life, her identity, made her chest burn. You can't, she said. He used you. He destroyed everything. Helena shook her head. If he truly knows something about those days, and we need to hear it, I can't live with half a story anymore. Clara hesitated. The journalist in her understood. The daughter in her wanted to run. But the truth was a current pulling her forward. And she knew there was no swimming against it. They met the next morning in a quiet cafe near the port. Rogerio arrived wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, his once slick hair now streaked with gray. He looked smaller than Clara expected. Not the monster she had imagined, just an aging man weighed down by his own lies. Helena, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's been a long time. Helena didn't sit. Why now? She asked. Why after all these years? Rogerio's hands fidgeted with a packet of sugar. Because I saw her, he said, nodding toward Clara. The girl from the hotel. I recognized her immediately. I thought maybe I could help. Clara leaned forward. Help? You left her there? He flinched. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I was desperate. The police were after me. I thought someone would find her right away. Helena's eyes flashed. You left a baby alone, Rogerio. You didn't even look back. The man swallowed hard. I told myself she'd be safe. I couldn't go back for her. His voice cracked then, years of guilt leaking through. I've had nightmares every night since. For a long moment, no one spoke. The clatter of dishes and the hiss of coffee filled the silence between them. Clara looked at him, trying to summon hate, but all she saw was emptiness. This man had no power anymore. He had already been punished by time. You don't get to ask for forgiveness, she said quietly. You don't deserve it, but I'll take your truth. Rogerio nodded. Your mother loved you, Clara. She never stopped. That's the truth. Helena turned away, her shoulders shaking. Clara stood and wrapped her arms around her mother, steadying her. When they looked again, Rogerio was gone, leaving only a few coins on the table, an offering, or maybe an apology. That evening, Clara and Helena walked along the beach again, barefoot this time. The ocean was calm, as if it too had been waiting for something to end. Helena broke the silence first. I thought finding you would heal me, she said, but it only showed me how much pain I carried. Clara nodded. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about understanding. They stopped at the shoreline, waves washing over their feet. What will you do now? Helena asked. I'll go back to London, Clara said, but not to escape. I want you to meet Margaret and Peter. You're part of my life now. Both of you are. Helena smiled through tears. I'd like that very much. They stood there for a long time, watching the sky fade from gold to violet. The years between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by something quieter. Peace, perhaps, or forgiveness. Later, back at the apartment, Clara opened her notebook one last time. She wrote, There are stories that begin with loss, but if you follow them far enough, they end with love. She placed the notebook next to her bracelet on the bedside table. The beads glimmered faintly under the light, the same blue as the sky outside. The next morning, when she boarded her flight home, Helena stood at the window of the airport waving until the plane disappeared into the clouds. For the first time in decades, her heart felt light. And in London, months later, when Helena arrived to visit, Margaret met her at the door with trembling hands and tearful eyes. The two women, one who had given Clara life and one who had given her a home, embraced without words. Between them stood Clara, smiling through tears. No headlines, no cameras this time. Just 3 lives stitched back together quietly, tenderly, by the invisible thread of love that had never really broken. Sometimes the answers we seek are not found in the past, but in the courage to face it. Love, no matter how delayed, always finds its way home. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. What moment touched you the most? The phone call, the reunion, or the final embrace? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-life emotional stories about love, loss, and second chances.